Hello. Our big group today. Yeah. So, I think Georgiana's going to be coming back. She had to go run an errand and then she was going to come back. So, yes. Yes. I want to go through a few more of these videos because they will help to kind of codify the things that we have been learning about the Tanakh and how the Bible is put together. And one of the things that you can pay attention to is, because we will get into this a little bit later, the way that the Tanakh is ordered makes it appear as though the Hebrew Bible is an unfinished book. The Hebrew Bible, it's presented in a way that shows us that the Hebrew Bible is an unfinished book. It's pointing us towards a Messiah that is coming, but has not yet come. So, people who follow Jesus believe that this is the finish to the book. This is how the book concludes. Or at least the next chapter, because Christians then believe that we are the living out of that, right? We are to be the new human beings. So, we'll go through the story of the Bible. These are not very long videos. These are, like we had last time, we'll have a little bit of discussion about it afterwards. And then I want to get into, there's videos on the different kinds of biblical literature, just so we're aware of that before we kind of dive into the individual studies of the books. So.
Bible's an important book, but it's really long. Yeah, it's a collection of many books written over a long period of time, but altogether they tell one unified story.
So, what's the story of the Bible?
Well, it begins by introducing us to a beautiful mind, the author of all reality, a being called God. And he has the power to take the dark chaos of the uncreated world and bring about order and beauty and a garden full of life.
And to crown this accomplishment, God appoints these creatures called humanity,
or in Hebrew, Adam.
And they're made as God's image.
Which means that they're commissioned to rule this beautiful world on God's behalf by harnessing all of its potential and creating even more beauty and order.
This is a story about humans using their power to do meaningful, life-giving work. But the question is, how?
Yeah, humanity now faces a choice that's represented by a fruit tree. So humans could partner with God and find freedom by trusting in his knowledge of good and evil, or they could seize power and define good and evil on their own, which, God warns, will kill them.
And they hear the voice of a dark, mysterious creature that tells them the choice is simple. Take the fruit. It'll give you power and freedom to rule the world on your own terms.
And so they seize this knowledge, and as a result they become suspicious and self-protective. It leads to fractured relationships, violent power grabs, and ultimately a whole civilization, Babylon, that has redefined evil as good. And so, God scatters this corrupted human project.
And here the story of the Bible takes an important turn. We zoom into the story of a man and a woman who come out of Babylon, Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, God promises that from them will come a new people, a nation that has another chance to make the right choice. And if they succeed, it will open up this new way forward for the rest of humanity.
And this is why the rest of the Bible story is about this family.
And it does not go well. Despite God's personal guidance, Abraham's family gives in to that same temptation to redefine good and evil on their own terms, apart from God.
Even when their best people were in charge, rulers who loved God's guidance and had divine wisdom, even they gave in.
And so Israel was warned by their own prophets that these choices would lead them back to Babylon, this time as conquered captives living in exile, and that's exactly what happened.
So even with God's personal guidance, Israel fails. Who can succeed?
Well, the prophet said that the story wasn't over. God's going to send a new leader to Israel to cover for their failures and to transform the people's hearts and minds so that they can make the right choice.
And so the part of the Bible called the Old Testament ends, and these promises are left hanging.
And then the biblical story continues into the New Testament. We're introduced to a man who comes from the line of Israel's kings, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said that he was bringing all these promises to their completion.
He confronted that dark, mysterious evil that all humanity has given into and resisted its power.
And then he announced that God had arrived to rule the world through himself. Jesus taught about God's definition of good and evil, and he said that real power is serving others. According to Jesus, it's people who love the poor and even love their enemies. These are the kinds of people who actually rule the world.
That's confusing, but also really beautiful.
And so is the claim that the story goes on to make about Jesus, that he is God become human, to be for Israel and for all humanity what we could never be for ourselves. He came to take the consequences of our evil into himself, and his sacrificial love proved more powerful than evil, than even death itself.
So now humanity is presented with a new choice.
Represented by a new tree.
Stick with the old way of being human, or venture into this new way.
And in the story, those who choose the way of Jesus find themselves energized by God's own power. People who know that they are loved and forgiven by God can become people who love and forgive others in return.
The Jesus movement quickly spread throughout the world, forming these new communities of people who follow the way of Jesus.
But they faced problems. There was persecution from the outside by people in power, and inside there was confusion, even compromise.
Yeah, because following Jesus is really hard.
And so the movement's leaders, called apostles, they wrote letters to comfort and to challenge these communities to stay faithful to the difficult way of Jesus.
And they're called to hope for the day when Jesus will come and change everything.
And so the Bible ends by pointing to the future day, when all wrongs are made right, when evil is eradicated, heaven and earth are united, and humanity can rule the world together in the love and power of God.
Okay, so that's the story of the Bible, and it brings all of these books together.
But what's interesting is that each book contains a different kind of literature that contributes to this story in a unique way, and that's what the next video will begin to explore.
Have you ever heard the Bible summarized like that? I mean, it was pretty succinct, right? Yeah. What did you pick up from it? Yeah. 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 Well, we're still recording it, so people can't hear what we're saying. Yeah. Do you have something? No? Yeah. Mm-hmm. The future hope? Yeah.
I think that's what we need to hang our heart on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have to struggle here
Mm-hmm.
because it's rough sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
There will be a time you're going to have to struggle.
Yeah. I think it's also that reminder that even people who lived very close to the time of Jesus, they struggled, right? And the message was still fresh with them. It's you can see how many different kind of theologies or ways of thinking about God have grown out of the Bible in this. And you think of Martin Luther talked about being of two kingdoms, of this world and of the kingdom of God, right? You have a foot in each. And it's a struggle, right? We know or we think, we believe, we discern what we believe the way that God is showing us to go. And we're still immersed in a world that is corrupt, has different priorities. Just hand it around.
Okay. So one of the churches I was a member of, the pastor would say, "We're in this world, but not of it."
Yeah.
And he said that a lot, and that always stuck with me.
Yep.
So that's why we're always kind of fighting ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in this world, but not of it.
Right.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So one of the things that I appreciate about how he presents this is it starts at the very beginning of the story of being in the garden, right? And that garden becomes a metaphor for how my friend put it, and I said this last week, doing it your own wrong way on Wednesday, right? Let's do it our own wrong way. They choose to take the knowledge of good and evil into their own hands and then define for themselves what good and evil is, to create those kinds of standards instead of trusting and relying on God, right? And so forever after that point, you see Israel and the leaders of Israel trying to define what is good and evil in God's sight over and against how the world defines it, and even looking for leaders who are going to be able to be that new leader that's going to show them what those things are. And so first you have Moses, who does a pretty good job, right? Remember Moses? And then you have every leader that comes after is paled in comparison to both Moses and this new leader that's supposed to come and do this. And so then we finally have this new person, or this new way of being human, that shows us this way of being human that is about living into the kingdom of God, shows up in Jesus. That is the pattern on which we are supposed to pattern our lives. So I think that for me is compelling, right? We have this future day, but we also have the pattern for how we live our life now so that we can bring into the here and now. We are supposed to be a part of that, breaking in of the kingdom of God. And it's not easy work, right? Like, it's not easy work. If it was, Jesus would not have been killed. And part of me thinks if we don't have our skin in the game a little bit, if we aren't getting arrows shot at us or rocks thrown at us in some way, are we really doing the work? Because this kind of work, this kind of being the kingdom of God, is going to upset people who live by a different standard. So it's just food for thought. Next, I want to get into a little bit the different forms of biblical literature, because we started on that last time I was here with you doing this. And I wanted to get into the biblical poetry, because that's kind of an important thing to understand, because we have all these different, we have prose, we have poetry, we have prophetic literature, and they all function differently. And so you have to comprehend and read them differently. So, and where are you on your study? Yeah. Okay. Where are we? What? Oh.
Learning how to read biblical narrative and showing how the Bible is one unified story. But 30% of the Bible is made up of ancient poetry. And I don't know about you, but I don't read a lot of stories where 1 out of 3 pages is some kind of poem.
Yet poetry is everywhere in the Bible. Some biblical books are entirely poetry. Most of the Hebrew prophets wrote masterful poems, and the majority of God's speech in the Bible is represented as poetry. It's also very common in biblical narrative for the story to pause while a character breaks out in poetic song. Like in the Exodus story, there's a narrative about Moses leading the Israelites through the waters of the sea, and that's followed by a beautiful poem about the very same thing.
But why a story and a poem? Wouldn't one version suffice?
Well, poetry has a different purpose than stories. Instead of describing the difference, let's just experience it.
Okay.
So, one part of the story goes like this.
The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through on dry land with a wall of water on their right and on their left.
That seems pretty clear.
Right?
Now the poem, telling the same event.
O Lord, by the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. Surging waters stood like a wall. Deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. Whoa, a wall of surging water like jello and divine nostrils? This is intense.
Yeah, the poem ignites your imagination through the experience of verbal art. And biblical poets did this with a specific set of tools. And that's what we're going to look at, the art of biblical poetry. The basic unit of any poem is the line. And then many lines are designed together to make a poem.
Okay, I'm used to this kind of poem. There's a meter, cadence, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, and there's rhyme. But poems in the Bible don't work like this.
Yeah, biblical poems are what you could call free verse. They don't use meter like some traditions of poetry do, and they don't use rhyme in the same way either.
So biblical poems have no order to them.
No, they just have a different kind of order. Biblical poems are most basically structured by couplets, two short lines that are carefully worded and placed beside each other. The first line makes the basic statement, and then the second line develops it in some way. It can do this by completing the thought, or deepening it with different words or images, or by contrasting it in some way. So check out the opening of Psalm 51. You can see it in action. In the first couplet, the poet asks God to show grace and love. But how exactly? In the second line, he requests forgiveness for his failures.
Okay, so this couplet is finishing one complete thought.
Right. And then the next couplet opens with washing as a metaphor, and then the second line offers a more vivid image, that of a priest in the temple, purifying things so they can be in God's presence.
Okay, so taking an image and deepening it.
Right. And then this third couplet opens with the poet's awareness of his sin deep inside. And that's followed by a description of the sin being outside. It's like it's in public, visible to themselves and other people.
So this couplet takes an idea and contrasts it.
Exactly.
So couplets by nature are a bit repetitive.
But the repetitive language forces you to slow down and linger over the feeling and meaning of it all, looking at each idea from more than one angle. And then groups of couplets can come together around one key idea. It's like a diamond with many facets, each line offering a different glimpse into the same core reality.
So this poem is exploring what it's like to be forgiven, offered a second chance.
And that's the kind of experience that can change a person. It's worth savoring and pondering. Now, biblical poets also use repetition on a larger scale. In many poems, you'll find a key line that's repeated multiple times. That's called a refrain. Or they'll open and close the poem with a similar couplet. That's called an inclusio.
Now, so biblical poets love design.
Oh yeah, these are works of verbal artistry. These poets use repetition to create all kinds of elaborate patterns that invite the reader to make connections between different parts of the whole poem that open up even deeper layers of meaning.
Cool. So I'm feeling at home with ancient Hebrew poetry.
But remember, poetry isn't something you master and then move on. Biblical poems are a bottomless well. They're packed with a surplus of meaning for those who are willing to slow down and ponder them.
And they're trying to pull my mind in new directions and discover new ideas.
Exactly. And there's even one more tool that biblical poets have to do that very thing, and that's what we'll look at in the next video.
All right, so we got biblical
Hey guys,
poetry.
thank you for watching this video on how to read biblical poetry. It's our first.
So, have you ever been reading along in the Bible and it gets to a section that is poetry that you didn't know that it was poetry, and you're like, why is it so repetitive? Why does it say the same thing? It's poetry. The Psalms are like that. Yeah, and there's different places that are like that. You're like, why does it say this is, you know, it has one line and then it basically says the same line again with something else added to it. You're like, that's boring. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if you don't know that it's poetry, you're going, ugh, right? If you know it's poetry, you might be able to appreciate it in a slightly different way. So,
About poetry, we have
Yeah.
a lot more
Ah.
in this how to read.
yes.
My question is, if it was written in their language, it didn't rhyme, is what you're saying.
It didn't rhyme.
All right, so we're not listening.
No. I'm sure there are things that we do miss not reading it in the original language, but the rhyming is not one of those things.
To read biblical poetry, which makes up over 30% of the Bible.
Yeah, poetry is a way of writing that doesn't just communicate information. It invites us to experience ideas with our imaginations, using creative imagery, or what we would call metaphorical language.
All right, let's talk about imagery and metaphor in biblical poetry.
So, some things in life are easy to understand because they're tangible, physical experiences, like being cold.
Yeah, being cold is no fun.
But other experiences aren't as concrete, like when somebody doesn't like you.
But that's no fun either.
So, two very different things, but notice how your mind has linked them together without you knowing it. So, when we say things like, she gave me the cold shoulder, or don't be so cold.
You could also flip it around and think of affection as warmth. It took him a while to warm up to me, or she's a warm person.
Exactly. So, we take a basic concept, like warmth, and then we map it onto an abstract concept, like affection. It gives us a more imaginative way to talk about our experiences.
We're thinking in metaphors.
Yeah, they provide the framework for how our minds make sense of the world. Metaphors govern all of our thinking and language.
Like right there, metaphors govern. That's a metaphor in and of itself, saying that ideas are rulers.
Or think about a connected metaphor that competing ideas are at war.
Yeah, in a debate, I have to defend my position and provide backup so I can win the argument.
And so you can see, metaphors aren't just a fancy way of writing, they're everywhere in our language. And the metaphors we use shape our imaginations and our behavior. And so it's no surprise that the biblical poets constantly use metaphorical imagery.
Now, some metaphors in the Bible are easy to understand, like light is good and darkness is bad.
But remember, the biblical poets lived in an ancient culture, which means that some of their metaphors might seem kind of strange to us.
Like what?
Okay, so picture chaotic water, like a deep, stormy ocean.
Got it.
Now, think about a time you were in danger, and then map those two onto each other, and
Danger is like chaotic waters.
right. And then the biblical authors take it further. They also talk about dangerous people as stormy waters. Like in Psalm 69. Save me, O God, for the waters are up to my throat. I've entered the deep waters. My enemies outnumber the hairs of my head.
Oh, the enemies are dangerous waves.
Yes, and so are enemy nations. Like in Isaiah 17, woe to the nations that rage like the raging, roaring seas. Or in Psalm 89, O Lord, you rule the swelling seas. You scatter enemies with your mighty arm.
So this is a basic metaphor for danger and chaos in our world. But God has the power over chaotic waters.
Right. And this foundational image is so important, it's introduced on page 1 of the Bible.
Oh right, the uncreated world Genesis 1 is a dark, chaotic ocean that God brings order to.
Exactly. The image begins there and then develops throughout the rest of the Bible, and so does its opposite. If chaotic water is a fundamental image of danger, think about what dry land would represent.
Dry land would be safety, security, stability.
Exactly. Some of the most basic human desires. And that is what God's providing when the dry land appears in the opening pages of Genesis.
And this is also where God plants the Garden of Eden.
And it's no average garden. It's described with imagery of an ancient temple, high above those dangerous waters. And then from this garden temple flows a river that waters everything.
So the human ideal is to be with God in a mountain garden temple.
Yes, this image permeates biblical poetry, like when David celebrates God's presence in the temple in Psalm 65.
How blessed is the one who's satisfied with goodness in your temple. A stream of God waters the land. You still the roaring of the waves and the turmoil of the nations.
Now watch. Because the temple was associated with being close to God's presence, this high rock could become a metaphor for God himself. Like in Psalm 18, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer.
And that's the image Jesus is drawing on when he says that listening to him is like building your house on the rock.
Exactly. And so notice how these rich metaphors in biblical poetry are rooted in images from earlier biblical narratives. That's how metaphors work in the Bible. You need the narratives to understand the poetic images, and the images reveal deeper meaning in those narratives.
Cool. Now, the largest collection of poetry in the Bible is the book of Psalms.
And learning how to read the book of Psalms, that's what we'll talk about next.
A whole lot of explanation is needed for that. But one thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of metaphor in the Bible, and sometimes people will read things literally that are meant to be metaphor. So that's just something to keep in mind and to be curious about as you're working through stuff. It's also why it's a good idea to have a study Bible, because sometimes you will have a study Bible that is good at showing you when it is a metaphor and when there is nothing about it being a metaphor when it's not. So, do any of you have a study Bible? Do you know what I mean when I say study Bible? Yeah. Yes. Do you want me to go get it? Yeah. I'll go get it, and you guys can look at it. We can talk about it a little bit. Hold on one second. I'll go grab it. All right. So this is the SBL. It is so it's the Society of Biblical Literature. That's what the SBL stands for. It is the NRSV, but it's the updated edition. The NRSV is what we use in church for our lessons. It is academically, it is considered currently the most respected translation of the Bible. The updated edition, there are some changes to it. There's not tons and tons, but it reflects some of the new archaeological finds that we have had in regards to texts, that there are some more textual variants that are noted in here. I don't know how many places they actually changed the wording a whole lot, but it has like footnotes that will say, in a couple of places, it will say, other sources say X word or whatever. So it's just showing that, they found some more texts that have a variation from other texts that they have previously. I don't think it changes anything in overall meaning. But you've got, so this is First Chronicles, starts here. This is the text of the Bible. These are the notes about the Bible here. So they have all sorts of notes that explain things that are found in there. And then in fact you have right here, you'll notice after some of the words here, there'll be like an A or a B. This is where you're going to find the textual variance, where some other places, or like this one says, it explains some Hebrew, some differences in the text in Hebrew, right? I'm wondering, this includes the Apocrypha and the Deuterocanonical books, which are not always in, right? The one thing I do not like about this Bible is that the pages are pretty thin. So you can it bleeds through just a little bit, and it's small print. But if you have a Kindle or something, you can get this in digital format, and you're not going to have any of those problems. And in fact, it'll have all of this stuff, and apparently Joe has this, so if you wanted to see it before you got it, and he usually has his iPad with him, you can see how it works. But he says, like, when a note comes up, you can just click on it and the note shows up. So it's a pretty decent way of doing it.
I think that would be so confusing to me,
It might be.
because as I'm
Yeah.
reading, and then all of a sudden I'm there, now I'm taken over here, and then I go back, and then I'm taken over here.
You might,
I think my mind is different because I would lose,
or you might get used to it too.
well, that's true.
It's kind of, I think, like with any kind of technology. I haven't worked with it, so I don't know. I don't know if it would be annoying or not. Joe seems to have kind of figured it out pretty quickly, but he does a lot of stuff with computers. So, yeah, maybe it would work for you, maybe it wouldn't. So that's where it would be like, maybe ask him if you can see
Yeah.
his first before you would invest in it. What I wish they would do is come out with an Old Testament and a New Testament that were separate, that could have thicker pages and bigger print. Just slightly, and I have made that request. I have never found a study Bible that they were willing to do that, because it's really thick, it's really heavy, but the information in it is so good. Yeah, right, yeah. Just in my spare time doing that, yeah. Yeah, I'll just translate it all myself. Yeah. I mean, that's another thing you can do, is you could get one of those page things where you just put it on top and you could do it. That's not going to solve the slight bleed through problem, and I find it especially when there's
Does it tell you like interpretations of things? I know it knows what it says in other places, but does it actually like kind of show, well, this is what it really means? Or
it doesn't do that as much in this one. The Lutheran Study Bible does a little bit more than this one does. This one sticks more to scholarship notes about, the translation, and it also shows you it'll have notes about where other references to a particular thing is. You know, you talk about metaphor in this and how you kind of need to have the Old Testament piece to really see what it's referring back to. This will tell you where you see those metaphors in other places in the Old Testament. So you might have an image, and we just did this on Wednesday when we were going through, was it the 5th chapter of Mark? And there was an image of a light or a lamp or something like that, and then it referred us back to like 4 different places in the Old Testament where it also talked about that particular thing. So the HarperCollins Study Bible is another one that's very good. That's the last one that I had. That is also based on the NRSV. I don't think that you're going to find one that has any larger print than this. I think they assume that if you're doing the study Bible, you're like a college or seminary student. Right. The HarperCollins. But, honestly, I think that if you're going to spend your money, I would go with the new one. Because it's going to have everything the HarperCollins has and more. I mean, like, us Bible nerds have been waiting for that to come out for a few years now. We're like, yay, it's finally out. But the Lutheran Study Bible is, I don't know if they make that one in large print either. Maybe they do. They might. I can look into it. But that would be a good one if you just can't wrap your head around that and it's too small print and it's too whatever. The Lutheran Study Bible is a pretty good one.
The problem with this is when you look at it, because it's, like you say, the thin paper,
Yeah.
you're seeing a background of blue or something.
Yep. Yeah, you get that blue line from the other side that bleeds through. Or if there's a picture on the other side, it kind of, yep. It's well written, not well published, I guess. Produced or something. So, but I plan on getting the online, the digital version and seeing if that's helpful. Yeah, I have enough problems focusing on things that this becomes challenging. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, looking into the digital format one, and in fact, we can maybe ask Joe to stay maybe next Sunday or something, see if he's got anything going on, see if he'll stay and bring his Bible and he can show everybody. We might even be able to like put it up on the screen here so people can see it. Yeah, yeah. Well, it is 11:30.
I will be in charge next week, and I have no technical skills, so somebody knows how to do this.
Yes. Well, we could wait until the week after too. That would be fine. Yeah. Yep. Sounds good.
So can I ask a question?
Mhm.
You said sometimes people read something as literal when it's metaphorical.
Yeah.
So if you're just reading the Bible without your study Bible, how do you know if perhaps you're falling into that trap?
You might not. You might not. It's one of those things where it's kind of hard to know.
I'm also thinking how difficult it is for translating because every language has things that are almost impossible to translate. You know, the same understanding.
Yeah. It is hard, and that's why biblical scholars, theologians, pastors, we go to seminary and we have to learn a heck of a lot about the culture of the time. There's a lot of background stuff that we have to do. So,
I find because I raise sheep and I'm a spinner and a weaver, there's certain things that really pop out. Like in Job, he didn't give cloth to the people to make clothing. He gave them fleece because everyone knew how to spin and weave. Everyone. A woman had to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all I'm going to do for today. I'll send you on your way. It's a little tired now, but it's improving, definitely. My voice is fine. It's just the muscles around here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any of those conditions you were talking about that you had before, have they improved at all? Are you getting better?
I haven't had any problems with the vocal cord dysfunction yet. So I'm hopeful.
Feeling a sore throat, that sort of thing?
Well, I've had a constant sore throat since I've had it done, so I'm waiting until it heals and then hopefully it will go away. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's getting close. Like I wouldn't say my throat doesn't hurt right now. It feels like I'm aware that it's still healing right now, and it's forming this new flesh on it that's kind of red and a little bit leathery almost, and it feels like I've had my mouth open all night breathing, like dry like that. So it's just kind of like I'm aware of it. I'm aware it's present. So, and this is far better than it has been the whole time. So I went from like yesterday being probably a level 5 pain to today 2. Yeah. 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 Even out, I was afraid that talking a lot today it would do it. Nope, it hasn't. So.
Isn't it funny when you get sick, you have something going, and then all of a sudden, one day to the next, you can tell there's absolute improvement.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, but
It takes time to get there. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Yeah. All right, guys. I'll send you on your way. Thank you for being here. Yeah.